I'm pretty sure my dad comes to a gym somewhere in this building.
I mean, there are a few gyms on site.
Yeah,
We've got about 7 or 8, I think.
Yeah.
There's actually a sign outside of this studio saying
I noticed
this is
that.
not
Yeah,
a gym,
yeah.
which I found hilarious. Absolutely hilarious. But yeah.
Right.
Yeah, he's 82. I think it's a workout getting up to the relevant floor.
It's amazing, that is.
But here we are.
Here we go.
Another day, another episode, Sam.
Yes. Are you all right?
I'm
you
very
okay,
good.
hon?
Yeah. Ready to go.
Yeah.
And yeah, we've had some incredible guests recently.
It's been bonkers, hasn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah.
Really good.
Rearing.
Really good feedback.
Yeah.
Really positive. People have been doing what you've asked them to do,
Yeah,
which is
doing all the clickety
sharing
things.
stuff.
Yeah.
Have we had some more reviews? I haven't looked.
I've not looked. Need to check on that.
We'll check on that before the next episode. And
Yes.
We'll see if people have listened to your little rant.
My gripes.
I feel like I've sat down and not checked everything, and we've got.
No, we're good. We're smooth.
I left a camera on overnight last night, so it was like heating this morning. I was like, but we should be fine.
We're living
We
there.
should be fine.
But
today's it feels like we're stepping into something a little bit different today.
Yes.
We've always talked on this podcast about listening to people outside of your industry, and we've had people that have kind of fallen just outside of that circle of our industry a few times, and those conversations have been amazing. Not to put any pressure on, but they've been great, haven't they?
Yeah.
And today it feels like we're going even further out of that kind
100%.
of comfort zone of circle or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And even
A bit of DIY going on above, isn't there? Like, straight away.
the mic's covering.
But we're fine. We're fine.
Last night, my mind was just absolutely racing. It took me a while to go to sleep, literally because I'd done so much research, and your world, Max, is fascinating, absolutely fascinating. So we can't wait really to.
We
dive
both
in
like
deep.
whiskey as well, don't we?
Indeed. So yeah,
it's going to be interesting. That helps.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're really excited. So Max Vaughan today, who owns White Peak Distillery.
Yeah, indeed.
Great to have you here.
Thanks, guys.
You come just down the road, really, from another World Heritage site to this World Heritage site.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're kind of an extension of each other. We're both sort of sitting on the river in that zone that goes from the Museum of Making in the centre of Derby all the way to Arkwright's Mill in Cromford. So yeah.
No, that's really good. And just before we actually jump in,
Are we going to
I wanted to say that we are Another Idea,
a podcast for creatives
and entrepreneurs that want to level up their business.
Yes, we are. Where do you want to start today?
First of all, how did you even get into the world of whiskey, Max? That's the thing, really, because it's very specific and there's truly an art to it as well. So how did you start?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm a lifelong whiskey fan, essentially. So that's kind of a good place to start, I think. And say lifelong, certainly adult lifelong. And probably something like 12 years ago, I met someone that was starting an urban craft whiskey distillery. And I got home that night and I literally had a conversation with Claire, my wife, and said, wow, there's some guy I've just met that's starting a whiskey distillery, and I thought they had to be in Scotland, and of course that's nonsense. And maybe we should look at doing that. It sounds really exciting.
What were you doing before that? What was your line of work?
What were you not doing?
Yeah, not at all relevant, really. So I'd spent 20 years on with a sort of a career-paying kind of day job.
Yeah.
That actually I'd loved over time, but working for big organisations by and large in the world of finance, kind of generally.
RBS, right?
Yeah, I worked for RBS. I trained as an accountant actually in this area.
Honestly, you're going to creep people out soon.
I know.
Like doing your homework.
I know it all.
He's had a private investigator outside your house the last 2 weeks.
There's me outside your house.
Claire, I think there's a guy in a...
But actually, interesting enough, even with that background of kind of analysing, numbers and forecasts and financial risk, we still decided to start a whiskey distillery, which it's hard yards in the early years. It's been amazing fun. But yeah, the background is I was a huge whiskey fan. Claire and I had sort of reached a point in our lives where I think we felt we wanted to do something together, and eventually, and it wasn't overnight, it probably was a 4 or 5 year kind of decision. Thinking about it, trying to build up a plan, what's the size of the ask, all of those things, because we're not from a drinks or spirits background. But eventually in 2015, we just decided, and it was a decision that, look, we could carry on nursing this dream forever and a day, or we could just get on with it. And it was kind of full of unknowns and uncertainties about the future. But I think certainly from my point of view, there was a sense in which I was probably more kind of anxious about getting to 70 years old and not having given it a go than having given it a go.
Yeah, that's it.
So we just thought, we actually didn't think what's the worst that can happen. It was more of a perspective, what's the best that can happen.
Yeah.
And I think when you start in your own business,
I
that's
think
the kind of mindset.
Think straight away as well, it's really reassuring to hear that you didn't have it all figured out and you didn't know what was going to happen. I think one common misconception is that so many people expect these businesses or people that are running these businesses to think that they just know what they're doing and it's all mapped out, it's planned, it's going to be a success because of this, this, and this. And actually, you can't go into it.
No, definitely not.
A bit blind and
I mean, it's like other events that you may or may not have in your life. Children, for example, there's never a perfect timing, and if you kind of waited for the perfect timing, then that probably would happen.
Miss it.
And business is hard. If it was easy, everyone would do it. So the kind of sense in which there's a roadmap that you just walk along and things happen is. I mean,
obviously, you can plan and prep for things, can't you?
Yeah.
There's a massive sense of uncertainty.
Yeah.
And walking into the unknown and just kind of go, okay, we're going to just have to figure this out as we go a little bit. Isn't it?
I think, and plans are a good thing. I think certainly our plan has changed a lot and continues to do so. But at least having a plan, you've given some thought. If circumstances work out differently, then you can look back at that and say, well, how is it we've ended up here when we thought we'd be over there? Okay, these are things that have happened, and actually now that makes some sense, and we've got that experience. Let's kind of fine tune our plans. So I mean, certainly ours are dynamic.
Any major sort of like rerouting that you've done over the years that you thought initially you were dead set on it? And
I think, I mean, in the main, and we've always had a kind of strong sense of what our core focus has been, and I think there's other businesses use this phrase, but do one thing well is something that we've never lost sight of, and we, like many businesses though, we've had to kind of pivot and adapt because of the pandemic. So for example, in 2020 we went from being a sort of a business with a very modest amount of direct consumer sales through our website to one that became 80% of our sales were through our website. So that required us to look at a whole load of operational things a lot more differently than we had before. But it's been a good thing for the business because it just forced us into an area which, if you're making a product that you're trying to sell to consumers, you've got to be up to speed with these days. So I think that was just an accelerated learning curve brought about by the pandemic. Wasn't a major change in direction, but just something that we had to cope with. Yeah.
Let me just let's just rewind the clock a little bit. So you were like 12 years old when you got hooked on whiskey. Why whiskey? What is it that kind of got you into whiskey, and how has that kind of passion sort of grown before you got to doing what you do now? Which is
so my dad's has always loved whiskey, so there's definitely an influence there. I don't think I was breaking his bottles open at 12, but probably somewhere around about 18. And to be honest, I think at 18, I'm not sure I really enjoyed it, because it's a kind of spirit that you need to spend a bit of time with.
Yeah.
And also, I think your taste buds develop as you get older in a different way. So yeah, my dad's always been there as a kind of whiskey fan, and that's definitely had a kind of just a major influence on why I like whiskey. And then I ended up at a period of time working for a Scottish bank, and it was almost like every single event that we ever laid on or went to, it involved whiskey.
Yeah.
And so that kind of helped my interest in whiskey start to grow. Not kind of between 9 and 5, but generally kind of in the evening. And at the same time, I started to visit whiskey distilleries and just get a bit more interested, not necessarily in a really geeky way, but just how is whiskey made, and they're really interesting places to visit.
Yeah.
Partly because many of them, certainly the Scottish ones, are just steeped in all this history, which I found fascinating. And I think the other thing which it's hard to kind of characterize, but whiskey's a product when you're making it that you got to put your kind of heart and soul into and really sort of believe in what you're doing for the long term, because you don't have a short feedback cycle. No one tells you about the whiskey you made yesterday in 6 months' time. You'll get that feedback in 5, 6, 7, 8 years.
That blows my mind.
And so in this kind of modern world where I guess we're all getting a little bit more used to, ordering goods and services on Amazon and receiving them the very next day,
in an hour.
It couldn't be any different. And I think there's a certain kind of honesty and romance about that side of the whiskey business, which definitely I find I've always found kind of attractive and really interesting.
I'm really fascinated by the complexities of whiskey, and there are certain I'm sure there are podcasts around whiskey tasting and that. We're not going to go into it too much, but can you just kind of give us a bit of an overview or insight into just how diverse whiskey can be? So, like from my experience, like bourbon is like the entry drug, isn't it? Bourbon, whereas then you kind of move over to like the really peaty kind of, I don't even know, almost like medicinal kind of taste of whiskey that I can't get my head around yet.
Yeah,
I'm not there, but.
Yeah, and I think you're right.
Diverse.
I think at a certain age, certainly in certain bars, people's introduction to whiskey may well be through, JD and Coke. We don't need to mention too many brands, but at the end of the day, bourbon, which Jack Daniel's isn't actually, it's Tennessee whiskey, but bourbon, as you mentioned, is just a form of whiskey. It's a form of whiskey that they make in America, and they make it from different grains to what we typically use in the UK. So to make bourbon, you need to use corn, or a minimum 51% corn. If you come to the UK and you're making single malt whiskey, which is what we make, then it's 100% barley. And so those two big changes in ingredients are going to make a significant difference. But yeah, if you look at the history of whiskey, the Irish and the Scots kind of between them, I think both lay claim to having kind of invented this. But it goes back, more than 400 years. And actually, I think if you do dig around, and at some point you can disappear down one of those kind of wormholes, you'll find that there was lots of places in Europe making some sort of eau de vie, so spirit from whatever their local kind of fermentable source of grain or fruit was. And I think it just became an extension of that. And then over time, people almost discovered that if you put this kind of eau de vie into an oak barrel, then it starts to take on some of the flavour and characteristics of that oak, and actually in many ways becomes a better and more palatable and more interesting spirit. But that was almost like an accident that happened over time. Certainly if we were having this conversation 400 years ago, we'd be talking about raw, unmatured spirit that by and large people were drinking to get kind of blind drunk on. That was
Igor might have a go at me for this. Like, it might be like a ridiculous question. Why have you asked that, Sam? But like, where's the term like Scotch come from in the whiskey kind of?
Yeah. And it's
how does that tie into whiskey?
Yeah. So we come up across that quite a lot because we're an English distillery. But Scotch whiskey is the biggest whiskey in the world in terms of volume that's made, certainly in terms of malt whiskey and blended whiskey, but to call it Scotch whiskey, there's certain rules and regulations, and one of them is your distillery has to be in Scotland, and there's a bunch of other things. So Scotch specifically refers to whiskey that's been made in Scotland, but it's become a term that some people use, and I guess you see it quite a lot in the North American market, where people refer generically to whiskey as Scotch.
That's it.
And it's a parallel perhaps in a totally different world would be people refer to vacuum cleaners as Hoovers. Well, Hoover's just a brand. The vacuum cleaner is what it is. And there's those kind of parallels between whiskey and Scotch. But so Scotch is whiskey that's been made in Scotland and adheres to some other rules that they police, quite strongly.
And you produce a single malt.
We produce single malt, so we're using English barley. It has to have been malted before we make our spirit from it. But single malt means essentially two things in the UK. It means it's been made from barley or malted barley, and it means it's been made at a single distillery. So if you're ever drinking single malt, those are two things that apply if it's being produced in the UK.
Sam.
So, Igor.
Studio Ninja.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about our sponsor. And I was wondering about what we need to say in this little section, because I really want to talk about just how vital it is to my business. And one thing that came up recently was, in my own business, was that I was thinking about whether I need to get a VA on board. Like, do I need somebody that's going to help me just, perform some of the admin tasks? And when I looked at it, and it really boiled down to what do I need somebody on board for, I realised that I don't actually do much admin.
Yeah.
And I don't do much admin purely because of Studio Ninja.
Yeah.
Everything's automated. My invoices, my diary, my questionnaires that I send out.
Email templates.
Chasing up invoices. Everything's fully automated to the point where it doesn't take a huge amount of my time anyway. So it kind of defeats the whole point of a VA. So for me, it is a very integral part of my business.
Yeah.
And I think when you're running a business, you're self-employed like we are, being efficient, being productive, making sure that things run in the right order. If you find yourself doing any kind of repeat task, you have to say to yourself, why am I repeating this?
Automate it.
And if you can automate it, then that's it. And that's really where Studio Ninja fits in with me and my business. And they have very kindly given us a discount code, haven't they, for this podcast? So what's that discount code, Igor?
Another idea.
And Another Idea gets you 50% off your first annual subscription.
Yeah.
So it's just a no-brainer. I mean, I wouldn't even be hanging around. Just go and look at Studio Ninja.
Just go and do it right now.
But thank you very much, guys, for sponsoring this podcast. We love you. We appreciate you. Keep it up.
We love Studio Ninja. I think that it's quite incredible just hearing you talk, because there's clearly an art to it, pretty much like cooking. So how do you even sort of like begin the process in terms of like what your recipe is going to be, and does it change from time to time and depending on, I don't know, the circumstances of the resources that you can actually get, and how do you even go through that process of decision, because it must be quite creative and
no, absolutely. And it's we spoke about it earlier, one of the challenges with whiskey is the feedback loop is enormously long, and so there's no sense in which you're making something today, if it doesn't work by the end of April, we'll just change direction and do something slightly different. So there's a certain kind of I guess override of just thinking about how things will work, and trying to just have a little bit of kind of caution, I suppose, to some extent, because you could completely rip up the rule book and try whole loads of wacky things, but you may end up with a terrible spirit down the road. So there's a few things that we've really focused on in terms of our USP around flavour. But backing up, what we did was in 2017, we had a small, almost like test laboratory on site whilst the main distillery was being built. And we were doing lots of small samples of unmatured spirit, but using different types of barley, because there are different strains out there, different types of yeasts to create the alcohol from the barley, and then running our test still in different ways. And so we came up just with a whole library of different types of what you call new make spirits, i.e. freshly distilled spirit, not matured. And then we kind of worked out what we preferred amongst that range. But then you need to think, well, how's that going to behave when you put it in a barrel or a cask?
I think
for 3, 4, 5 years.
How long? What is the turnaround time from putting it in a cask to bottling, what is that period?
Yeah, so the minimum period in the UK, and these rules have been in place in Scotland for many, many years. We're just starting to establish some rules in England, but essentially it's 3 years. And there's an overarching EU rule as well that says you can't sell a spirit in the European Union and call it whiskey unless it's been matured for at least 3 years in a cask or a barrel.
So you put all that work in, and you have to wait 3 years before you get any return on that investment.
Yeah.
How do you sleep?
But badly. Yeah, I think it's.
It goes against everything, doesn't it? In business, that we're all kind of conditioned to think, which is like, I need to get a return on my investment.
Yeah, it's difficult. So obviously, you need to factor that period into your plan. As a business, your kind of financial plan, and 3 years is the minimum. So you then decide as a distillery whether you think barrel number 10 is okay after 3 years or not.
Okay.
And in all likelihood, you're going to leave it longer.
What are the differences if you leave it between 3 and 7 years? How does that impact the whiskey?
Yeah, so what happens is the spirit will certainly get more extract from the, let's say it's oak, and most whiskey is matured in oak barrels or casks. It'll get more extract from the oak. So, and that's things that people who drink wine will be familiar with. So vanillins and tannins and wood sugars. So that changes over time, and then also the barrels or casks themselves they're kind of watertight. Obviously, we're not putting water in them, but they're watertight, but they're not airtight. So they breathe. And essentially, you can almost picture it like a set of lungs. So at certain types of the year, the lungs are breathing in, the wood's breathing in, and it's kind of soaking up the spirit into the wood fibres of the oak. And at other times of the year, it's breathing out, and it's basically pushing that spirit back into the inner sanctum of the barrel. And that kind of activity starts to change and generate flavours from the spirit that you've put in there in the first place. So it's not an inactive process. The casks and the barrels are active across seasons and then across time durations. And then there's a whole range of things that you can then start to do after the spirit spent a number of years in a particular barrel or cask. So just one example, we've got a new release out today, and the whiskey spent equal amounts of time in an ex-bourbon barrel and in a port cask. So the spirit that we made, the new make spirit, went into an ex-bourbon barrel for 2 years, and then we took that spirit out, and after 2 years, it's not whiskey, it's still maturing spirit, and then we put that into a bourbon cask and left it in there for, broadly speaking, another 2 years. So this spirit...
we've cancelled this afternoon's guest. we're going over to Worksworth. We're going to go and
so that's just one example, but there's so many sort of different areas that you can look at in terms of flavour, in terms of what whiskey we're going to put in a bottle. So people tend to think about the spirit going into a cask and that being its only life journey, and it's not.
Just the science of it just fascinates me.
And I think something that I found quite fascinating with you guys at White Peak in terms of how you do your casking, it's quite, well, I've never heard of it really. It's quite unique really, the way you sort of like the top end of it, it's sort of like might be French, whereas the middle might be, talk to me about STR, because just so I just want to know more.
Okay, well this is getting quite geeky now, but I'm good with that. So one of our cask suppliers are based in Porto, in Portugal. For those that don't know, that area of Portugal, there's a lot of wine grown.
He knows.
So the Douro...
I'm Portuguese. So,
So the Douro Valley, and obviously the port houses themselves. But this, the cooperage we go to, family owned, called the Diaz family, 4th generation, lovely people, lovely business. And we went to visit them in 2017 and just to understand their operations, and then started to have a discussion with them about the kind of casks they could supply. And over lunch, one of the discussions was, well, if we're refurbishing these casks, which is what they do to provide this kind of STR cask, STR stands for shaved, toasted, and recharred. There's no reason why we can't swap a few elements of the original cask out. And so what we ended up doing is saying, well, okay, well, that's interesting. So we can start with something that was 100% American oak and change some elements to introduce some French oak. And they said, yeah, we can do that. So we just thought, well, yeah, fine, let's do that. We'll
it's like a massive mix and match in order to kind of like get your...
Yeah. Well, so we just thought, well, we'll order a few of those and see how they work out.
It just goes to show, doesn't it, the influence of the material that you're putting your whiskey in. It must be, I suppose, from an outsider's point of view, like they probably just overlook that part.
Yeah.
For you, it's very clear that that's almost integral to
it is.
What makes your whiskey.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a really, that kind of wood program or cask selection's a really important part of the kind of whiskey making process. I think one of the things that for us we view differently, and I'd say that about craft whiskey generally, the more modern kind of craft whiskey distilleries, is we're trying to look at the whole whiskey making process in terms of where we can add flavour. So mashing, fermentation, distillation, the type of barley we're using, the type of yeast we're using. But then at the end of it all, the cask is certainly important. There's been an historical view, I would say, that the flavour in whiskey is all about the cask, and we would not agree with that. Yeah. The cask is important, but it's just part of this kind of continuum of trying to generate flavour. And so the SDR cask, the American oak with French oak heads, it was a bit of an experiment, and we bought some, we filled them. Obviously, we were sampling as these things were maturing, and a year in, actually some of those kind of experiments, we thought, actually, we're not as keen on this as we thought we might be. Okay. So the next time we ordered, we didn't order any more of those. Another year later, when we went back to those original casks to try them after 2 years, we were like, oh, wow, this is like, manna from heaven.
Get on the phone.
Yeah. We should have ordered some more. So, there's definitely that kind of voyage of discovery in whiskey, which just, it keeps it really interesting for us.
Yeah, I can imagine, Yeah, that anticipation level must be pretty high when you get to 4 or 5 years down the line and you're like, it's time to see what we've got.
Yeah, absolutely. And because we do sample and test as we're going along, by the time we hit year 5, it's not a complete surprise to us. It's not like a ta-da kind of moment when we sort of open up a cask. But there's still, changes in the whiskey's journey. But we feel like we've built up a good understanding now after 5+ years of how our spirit behaves in certain different cask environments.
So is that 5 years now where you've started to generate some income?
Yeah, I mean, so we started the business in February 2016. We released our first whiskey last February, so February 2022. So in terms of our core product, we didn't have any for 6 years. But last year was the first year that we were selling whiskey on a regular basis, and it was a great year for the business, but just for us to get to that point where people could taste our main product.
Am I right in thinking that the first bottle that you guys sold was auctioned for something ridiculous like $9,000?
Yeah, no, it was, and we didn't see a penny of that, which was always intended. So. There's a market, there's an auction market for whiskey, which there's some pros and cons if you're a producer. But let's not get into that. But one of the things we decided early on was for our very first release, and it wasn't just our first release, it was the first whiskey that ever been made in the Derbyshire and Peak District region.
Come on,
what an achievement! Well done.
Thank you.
Incredible.
We would keep back bottle numbers 1 to 12. Most of our releases, the bottles are individually numbered, which is all doable these days with digital printing. So we kept back bottle number 1 to 12 with a plan that we would at one point during the year have a chat with an auction house and put them up for auction with a view to raising money for charity. So those 12 bottles went to an auction house in August, so that was kind of 6 months after the release. And bottle number 1 went for a hammer price of actually almost £10,000.
That's amazing.
And by the time you add on the kind of the buyer's fees, anyway, across those 12 bottles, I think we raised nearly £16,000, and that money went to two charities. It went to the Peak District National Park and Derbyshire Wildlife Trust, and we kind of split it equally. And those are two charities that where we are sort of in Ambergate on the River Derwent, and in this beautiful county we live in, we feel a real connection with. And we just thought this whiskey can do some good somewhere on with some of the local projects. Otherwise we wouldn't put our whiskey on an auction website, because really we want our whiskey to get to people who enjoy whiskey and enjoy drinking it and can just pay the sticker price to us and don't have to pay inflated auction prices. But for those 12 bottles, we thought, look, let's try and make as much money as we can from that for good causes.
And from a marketing point of view as well, it's excellent, really. So
yeah, absolutely. And obviously that wasn't lost on us. As we sit here today, to the best of my knowledge, it's still the highest auction price that's ever been achieved for a bottle of English whiskey. So we got some. We certainly got some kind of recognition and some publicity around that, which is great when you're trying to grow your business and get more brand awareness out there.
Yeah. Can you talk to us about setting up a distillery? Like, where do you even begin? And how much money do we need when me and Igor move into whiskey making?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll answer that slightly in reverse. I would say it's a bit like any kind of big project. It's almost like think of a number and double it.
Okay.
So it's that kind of there's going to be costs along the way that you hadn't necessarily anticipated. The other thing with setting a whiskey distillery, you've got those upfront costs of building your distillery. You've then got all the working capital costs of making whiskey that you can't sell for certainly that minimum of 3 years.
Yeah.
And in essence, if you look at those two things, the upfront capital costs and the working capital you need, it's a similar number. And then it depends on scale. So then it's a function of, are we happy with this being a kind of like a kind of cottage industry type business, and just in our case maybe just Claire and I, we would have been the only 2 employees, or do you want to build something that's slightly bigger? And that range is absolutely enormous. But I would say of the kind of established English whiskey distilleries that are producing a reasonable commercial volume, people have invested between £5 and £10 million, I would say, of that order, to build the distillery and to build up their stocks of whiskey. And some will have invested many more. In terms of how you start, I think it's I guess like anything, you kind of there may be some things and then what I did and what Claire helped me with was we then just got on the phone a lot and started to say things like, well, we're thinking about starting this whiskey distillery, we know nothing about this area, but someone has suggested we speak to you. And what we found was that in the whiskey industry and business, people were very generous with their help. I think in large part it's a really hard thing to be successful at. And so we got lots of good advice, and one phone call then may have spawned 3 other contacts, and just building up this picture. But I think, like lots of things in life, you've then got to sieve that for what you think makes sense for your business, because there'll always be people out there that have got good advice and maybe things that they think you should be doing. But you've got to work out, what of that advice do you think is relevant to you? What are you going to kind of cherry pick? But that's what we did, essentially. In our case, it was literally 4 or 5 years building up this picture. Claire and I were both still working full time. We got 3 relatively young kids, so we were just trying to build up a sense of, how do we go about doing this? Taking advice and just information where we could.
Yeah. You must be really good at business in order to convince investors to invest in you for a product that you're not going to be able to see for like 3 to 4, 5 years. It's incredible.
Yeah, I think, look, I mean, taking me out of the equation, I think a lot of startups, if you're raising money from outside investors, people invest in the founders. Obviously, the underlying business plan has got to make some sense to them. But it could be, an absolute 5-star bells and whistles business plan. But if they don't think you as a founder or you as a group of founders can deliver on that plan, they're not going to give you their money. And so I think at that stage, people invest in people.
Yeah. It's very
good.
clear already, having only spoken to you for like 20, 30 minutes, that you're like, your passion for whiskey in the industry is, it like really just shines through. And you just saying that, I can kind of see, if I was fortunate enough to say I'm an investor, I'm not. But yeah, that is quite evident.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, for certainly for Claire and I and the whole team that works for us, that that kind of that sense of passion about what we're doing, and also keeping things grounded is is kind of, I suppose, I think, key to our kind of culture. But yeah, with the fundraising, there are things you can do to try and help yourself. So I'd worked for 20 years in various different kind of walks of life, but mainly in finance. But you kind of go through your list of friends and family and people you've worked with and think, well, who might be interested in this kind of investment? I mean, a whiskey distillery is quite high risk, right? So you think, well, if it's someone who to have a low risk appetite, who suspect they've got a low risk appetite, well, probably don't ask them. But I approached 18 people in the first instance, and 16 said yes.
Amazing.
So, and then it was really scary, because then we thought, okay,
we got to make it happen.
Yeah, now it's no longer an idea that we can just kind of kick the can down the road for a while. People want to invest, so having the necessary funding, or what we thought was the necessary funding, is no longer an excuse for not moving ahead. We've got it. But it was, and those investors have been kind of fundamental to where we've been able to get to today. In terms of return, there's no get rich quick scheme with making whiskey. So the first money we raised was in August 2016, and they've been amazingly supportive. And the kind of people that certainly we feel we want involved in our business.
They must be pleased with where it's at now, though. It looks like you're in a healthy position, like you've produced your first batches, and that seems to have been really well received. The brand and the identity that you're putting out is incredibly strong and well thought out, and it looks like you're building something that's really positive and it's moving in the right direction, I suppose.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's true. 2022 for us was a great success on many levels. You mentioned some of them. The whiskey's had some great feedback. The kind of packaging and branding, is really well kind of anchored and supports everything that we're doing. And we feel like we're well positioned for the long term, which you're constantly having to think about in the whiskey market. And also, we mentioned kind of where we're located, but we're in a former wireworks, operated for 120 years, used to export its products all over the world, Cincinnati, Niagara, down to Africa, and they made really good products. They made them the proper way, and the business was successful for many, many years. And that kind of informs a lot about how we feel about our business. There's this kind of almost legacy that we feel like we want to live up to, but also extend. And I think also Claire and I certainly think about all the key decisions we're making, in the sense that, when we're gone, what will people think about this whiskey distillery that we started? And that's important to us. And because it's important to us, it's important for the whole of our team as well. And so there's a sense in our minds in which we're building something that's kind of, hopefully, is going to be, a sort of destination for whiskey in Derbyshire for decades to come. And that kind of makes you think long term, and I think those are good decisions.
It's a really, like for us, it's really reassuring to hear that, isn't it? I know we're in different industries and fields, whiskey making and a podcast, but we've, before we started recording, you asked us, so what's the kind of, how do you monetize this? And we're like, well, at the moment, it doesn't make any money.
Yeah.
But again, it kind of, it brings us back to like what our core value is.
Yeah.
Your core value is to produce, a really impactful whiskey that's going to last generations, and we're not doing that, but we're trying to bring value to an audience and grow that.
Yeah. And the whole idea of playing the long game.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I was going to get to. It's that, isn't it? It's that people want instant success. They want that quick fix, and actually sometimes we we're all guilty of kind of falling into that trap and thinking that that's the case. And
and I think what you tend to see in the press is it's self-selecting. Those people that have made a lot of money very, very quickly are the ones that hit the headlines. The 99.9% of people who are grafting hard at something they believe in don't necessarily hit those headlines, but have got nonetheless very worthy businesses. And I think we've always had a strong sense in what we're trying to sort of build and develop long term, and it's you can get kind of pulled off to different sides. So, for example, we make a nice gin, we make a nice rum. We've had lots of people ask us over the years whether we'll make gin for them.
Yeah, the gin's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, gin was a huge wave that I think has now crested. But the volume of gin brands out there is enormous, so it's a very competitive market. And at least half the gin brands don't make their own gin. So it's been manufactured by someone else centrally. They're sticking their label on it.
That's it.
And then
what a
for
scam.
them it's
really that happens. So they're not making
that happens.
Wow,
it didn't happen. It happens. But there's lots of, and there's no naming names here, but
you can name names. Let's call the bastards out.
But lots of consumers, perhaps won't care. I mean, if they like the product, then that's the key thing, and I think that's true. But for us, we want to establish this destination for craft spirits, for whiskey in particular. We're passionate about what we're doing, and actually, we're not interested in making spirits for the people. And that's probably meant that we've turned down some fee-earning business over the years. But that's not what we want to be known for in the long run. And so at the time, you kind of think, oh crikey, there's a few pounds, shilling and pence we can earn over there. But actually, if you're thinking long term, you just think, well, it doesn't really fit with our brand and where we want to be. So the answer is no. But let's move on with our own stuff.
Wow, that's
great, isn't it?
Yeah. Just the assurance of really knowing your vision and really sticking to it and being assertive about it.
Confidence or naivety? It's definitely confidence.
It's definitely confidence.
Definitely confidence. It's great. It's really reassuring to hear. I don't think you get much more long term, do you? Than
I think it's the same with you guys, right? It's not easy when you start in this kind of business, so you got to believe in what you're doing. And if you two don't believe in what you're doing, then you're kind of doomed.
Who's going to believe it for us?
And I think it to some extent it becomes self-selecting in that good brands and good businesses, whatever walk of life they're in, and they may be off the scale in terms of financial success. They may not be. Depends how important that is to you. But fundamentally, I think if you don't really believe and are passionate about what you're doing, then you're destined to be average.
Yeah.
You touched on your sort of branding and identity a little bit ago, and I've got a question from a listener actually. What's the best design agency in Derby? And that's from Will Hives of Design.
Yeah, other design agencies are available. Now, look, we were delighted to find Will early on, through some contacts we had, and I think we continue to work with Alt Design. But they something very kind of simple, what we thought was simple in the early days, sort of will help to open our eyes up to, giving thought to the brand positioning, and therefore, what do you want people to think about your business, your brand, when they may just see your logo for 10 seconds. So we've worked with Alt a long time, and certainly in those very early days, they helped us with an enormous number of things to kind of get going.
They've done a great job. They've done a great job with the branding. Like I think you said to me earlier before Max even got here about how the labelling looks and how striking it is. I was like, that's my mate Will does that. But they've just
and I think also for us the fact that we try to work with as many local
that's
absolutely.
it
businesses, be them suppliers, customers, collaborators as we can. The distillery, when you come down and have a look around, there's a whole load of impressive stainless steel tanks and various bits of other equipment. All that stainless steel was fabricated in Derbyshire.
Yeah,
brilliant.
And for us, that was really important. So if we can find good people that we think have got a good alignment, understanding of what we want to achieve locally, then that's always going to be our preference. And the same with collaborations. We work really closely, for example, with Thornbridge Brewery up in Bakewell.
That's it. Jaipur, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly right. So they make this. They've been making this award-winning IPA for 17 years, maybe even longer now. And every week we go to Thornbridge and they crop some of their spent brewer's yeast, and we take it away. We stick it in a fridge in the distillery, and every drop of whiskey we've ever made has been made using some of this yeast from Thornbridge Brewery. So that provides a really nice connection for us about what it means to make a whiskey in Derbyshire. At a tangible level, what does it mean? Well, it means we're working with this great Derbyshire-based brewery just 15 miles up the road from us. And it also creates... it starts to create a bit more of a kind of heritage and history that we can talk about, because until we arrived, there's been no heritage of making whiskey in Derbyshire in the Peak District, but there's hundreds of years of heritage of beer making, and so we've created this link, which I think starts to again underpin hopefully part of our kind of brand ethos for being a Derbyshire-based distillery, and focusing on that kind of longer term.
Keep selling Derbyshire to him. I'm working on it. He comes up from Peterborough every time. I'm like, mate, you just need to come and live up here. It'd be so much easier. Don't know if you know, but Derbyshire has like the highest concentration of microbreweries, doesn't it, in the UK?
Yeah, I mean, I think you might be right, Sam. That statistic sadly is changing, a lot all the time, and not always in a positive way, just because of the whole kind of cost environment that businesses, but brewers in particular, are facing.
Yeah. It's just great to hear that you're collaborating with local businesses and supporting other businesses that are helping you in turn as well. And I love that point that you made about having the heritage. It made me kind of in my head go, how do you bring heritage into a brand that's just started?
Yeah.
Where have you bought that from? And obviously, the connection obviously is the Wye Works, isn't it? And looking at that industry,
and that backstory, it just feeds into our kind of brand and ethos in so many different ways. But at a kind of superficial level, you'll see it in our packaging. You'll see it in our glass bottle, which we've had,
which is beautiful, by the way.
Bottle. Thank you.
Absolutely incredible, and it makes sense now. And the whole zigzagging with the whole
it's a metaphor for a cable unwinding, which for those people that never visit a distillery, they can at least start to make that connection if they understand our backstory. I mean, that was a 15-month project that my wife Claire ran with, but we just kind of knew what the value of that was going to be long term. And so, that whole heritage piece is, well, we've got a 3-word lockup around our brand, which is heritage, provenance, flavour, and those are kind of the key pillars that inform pretty much most of our decisions. And heritage, established in 2016 doesn't kind of necessarily help you get there, so we don't have that anywhere, but the kind of backstory of the Wye Works and how it kind of informs the way we think about what we're doing is super important.
That's clever marketing.
It is. It's genius, because you could have moved onto an industrial site that's purpose built and brand new, and it would have gone against everything that you're kind of trying to build.
And the other, I've spoken about this before, but the other kind of obvious maybe line to go down with branding is, Derbyshire's a beautiful county. It's known for obviously the peaks, kind of rolling hills, rivers, wonderful landscape.
You sold yet?
So much better than Peterborough. So that would have kind of been like an obvious route to go down in terms of branding and just aesthetics. And we thought long and hard about that, but that wasn't going to provide us with a kind of unique backstory, because there's lots of nice hills and rivers and lakes all over the United Kingdom. So so that of itself ceases to be a kind of unique reference point. But that was a tussle for us, because the reason we've set this business up in Derbyshire is because we love this county. But focusing the brand around Kinder Scout or Mam Tor for us didn't feel like the right thing to do.
So the site and the unit that you currently kind of reside in, was that like a fortunate decision, like, or was it part of the process that took you, like the wire works and the connection to that? Was that just something that you were like, oh my lord, this is all just kind of falling into place? And actually, we have this wonderful connection here. Or
yeah, so I think
bit of both.
bit of both. Sometimes you need a bit of luck. Sometimes you create your own luck. As it turns out, from a former life, I knew a little bit about that site. I used to mountain bike in the woods behind in the early 90s. So Shining Cliff Woods.
Yeah.
And so we had kind of three, criteria when we're looking for a site. We wanted a site that was on a river, and that was just a sense of romance about where you should find a whiskey distillery. We wanted a site that was a reasonable commute, so not as far as Peterborough. And then also we wanted to try and find a building that had some personality and some history. Yeah. And so when you've got those criteria, actually there aren't that many rivers in Derbyshire. So then, that kind of cuts things down a bit. And if you start kind of Google earthing around a bit, you'll find some old buildings that are perhaps unused that might be the right space for the distillery. But then I just thought, that place I used to kind of cycle behind in Shining Cliff Woods, that's got all of those things, and it's only just up the road in Ambergate.
It's cheeky around the back of there.
Yeah.
There's some little climbs up there.
Yeah,
definitely.
there are. But so I contacted the landlord. Claire and I went down in February 2016, and as soon as we walked through the door of the space we're now in, I mean, it was a mess. It was basically full of just industrial bric-a-brac that had been left behind when the wireworks closed in the mid-90s. But it just felt like the right place for a distillery. And then over time, once we built the distillery and we started to dig under the skin of the wireworks and its place in the community and all of its history and the kind of products they'd made and the kind of global impact they'd had, that was a bit more of, wow, there's a lot more to this place than just kind of ticking those, three criteria about on a river, lovely building near home. So that's kind of developed over time.
That's incredible.
Do you want me to pull up Rightmove on your phone?
I'm moving, okay? Zion, pack your bags. I guess the warehouse itself, it's huge. So for anyone that is sort of like, first of all, everybody should just Google it to see where you guys are situated, because it's beautiful. But it's a feat. It's massive, really. So you can't do it alone. You have to bring staff in. And how has that evolved over the last few years, really, in terms of like interesting people, the values, and just instilling that into them, really, to really...
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any kind of roadmap for that. I guess we have a kind of sense of what we're like as individuals. I'm talking about Claire and I in the first instance, and what we felt about the brand. And I think, generally speaking, as we've built the team out, and there's 12 of us now, I think we've tried to find people that are kind of on board, to the extent they can be when they're not part of the team, with the vision. They're passionate about what we're doing. They feel enthusiastic about what we're doing, and some of them have brought some outside sort of experience to the table as well. But I'd say by and large, the more important piece is, are they kind of really on board with what we're doing? And, some of the more kind of technical stuff, they can kind of pick up, on the job, so to speak.
Does anyone work for you that doesn't like whiskey?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a couple of people that work for us for whom they're kind of starting out on their whiskey journey.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's exciting though, isn't it?
Yeah, I let people rephrase that
you?
question. It's not that you don't like whiskey; you've just not found a whiskey that you like yet. And there's hundreds of whiskies out there. So, but they definitely some of those people get more intrigued in what we're doing, and they see how other people, our customers, our followers, enjoy what we're doing and enjoy drinking the whiskey. And I think, slowly...
I do think if somebody starts their first whiskey experience with trying one of those, I kind of say TCP, like the really medicinal, you're going to be shocked by it. It's going to be like, well, I'm never doing that again.
Yeah.
Because that's like, you have to build up to that.
Yeah.
Whereas, there are certainly other whiskies out there that are a lot softer on the palate.
Yeah. I mean, our whiskey, we've tried to think about it in terms of it being approachable, and so having appeal to a broad church, let's say. Those, heavily peated Islay whiskies, I love a drop of that stuff, but you are, to some extent, kind of, starting to segment or narrow your potential customer base, because it's a bit more of an extreme
It's striking
taste.
that balance, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're not producing a JD.
No.
You want something that's got substance to it, and people are going to be like, oh yeah, this is something else.
You want something that's got that flavour that we're looking for, but we're not looking for it to be mass market, so it hasn't got to appeal to absolutely all of the masses.
What over the last sort of 5-6 years, is there anything that's really stood out that surprised you about setting up a distillery? Is there anything that's kind of caught you a bit off guard, shocked you, or that's been like a shit, this is hard?
Challenges.
A real challenge.
I mean, one of the early shocks. Look, we're still living with lots of those challenges. I think for any business, when you're in those early years, there's always a few potholes, and it's how you kind of navigate them. I think once you've navigated a few potholes and not shredded all your tyres, you start to think, well, just bring it on. We'll deal with the next problem when it arrives. But one of the early surprises that we had was that HMRC obviously have to give you the operating license to make spirits before you can start. But one thing that was a surprise to me is that they won't entertain your application until you've built the distillery.
Wow.
Okay.
So
hold on a second.
So you have to spend a good, I don't know, how many millions? I don't know.
Well, so you're kind of all in, and then you put your application in for your distilling license. Now, if you're with hindsight, you can say there's only limited grounds on which they can refuse, but there are grounds. But one of the principal reasons for them having that process, I think, is because some of the criteria are kind of qualitative. Are the people behind it fit and proper people? I.e., are they the kind of people that we feel comfortable will be eventually collecting alcohol duty payments on our behalf and handing them over to us? So are they fit and proper, and are they in this for the long term? And I think there's no better way of making that assessment than walking into a distillery saying, okay, I can see what you've spent here.
It's a good filtering process, isn't it? It's not the same with us, isn't it?
It's not something that just looks good on social media, but actually it's in the corner of a car park and could get dismantled in 6 months' time. And then so that was
they've seen the commitment, haven't they?
They've seen the commitment. But certainly for us, we've only ever built one distillery, and don't intend to build another one. So we've not been through that process before. But that was a kind of a period of time where there was a fairly high levels of anxiety.
It's making that commitment, isn't it? And not knowing.
Yeah.
It doesn't get any bigger than that.
No, I think kind of understanding what their criteria are, and just giving them all a reason to say yes.
Yeah.
They said yes anyway.
Yeah. But since then, the Derwent Valley was badly flooded in November 2019. So the main bridge that you have to cross over on our site, so it's not on the public highway, but you've got to drive your car over it, was taken out by a load of kind of flotsam debris that came down with these swelled river levels.
Here in the mills.
So we lost our bridge very much like you for 15 months. So you could not, as a consumer or as a visitor or a follower, drive around to the distillery shop.
I'm getting my mountain bike out. Going around the back.
So that happened, and then it got repaired in February 2020. And March 2020, we all know what happened.
Wow.
So, in terms of challenges, some of them have been those external factors that you can never predict. But you've got to adapt and pivot, and kind of don't stick your head in the sand, essentially.
I think you've built something absolutely incredible. It's beautiful to see, and I was watching a video of Dave explaining the process of how the distillery works and everything else. I'm like, I'm getting into this. I'm really liking this. So do you do that for can anybody walk into the distillery and learn more about whiskey making?
Yeah, so we've got a sort of an open door type policy, and if people turn up and they're enthusiastic about whiskey making, we're always going to have a conversation with them. We do try and, at the end of the day, we've got whiskey to make. So what we do is we put on distillery tours, bookable on our website. So, but on a Thursday or a Friday or a Saturday, you can book on a tour and you can talk to Dave. And it's one of the things that we've deliberately done from the get-go is involve the distillers or the people that are making the whiskey in the kind of visitor experience in the tour process. It kind of would have been easy for us as a business to find someone to be, let's say, a tour guide, but our experience of that kind of setup when we've been to see it is that you don't necessarily get the kind of passion and product knowledge coming through. So all of our distillery tours and all of our visitors, they will get to hear from someone that's involved in the whiskey making process. And if you look at our TripAdvisor reviews, that sense of passion, we've used this word a few times today, it just comes across in like 9 out of 10 reviews. And I think that's part of that deliberate decision to involve the makers in that kind of visitor process.
I was watching a video and I felt fascinated by it, and never mind being there. I'm sure it'll be absolutely amazing to really just go through the process of it all, really.
Yeah, and we enjoy doing it as well because people are interested in what we're doing, so then that kind of makes you more enthusiastic about what you're doing. I mean, our Saturday tours, I think they're largely sold out until middle of the year, so we're just about to add a new tour. It's called a warehouse tour, and this is for people that are really interested in their whiskey, and we go and sit in a warehouse. We draw some samples straight from the cask, so you're drinking cask strength whiskey, and you'll be talking to either Dave or me or one of our other team called Tom, enthusiastically about what we're doing, but you're sat amongst all these casks.
Probably wouldn't want to do that during the winter anyway, would you? Really? They're not heated units, are they?
They're not heated units, but we did a trial run with some kind of friends of White Peat Distillery last Saturday, and the feedback we've had, even though it was 5 degrees, has been absolutely amazing. But with these warehouse tours, they're not that common with distilleries, but there'd be a health warning, wear a thick coat, basically.
I had a previous couple bought me some vouchers for White Peat Distillery, I think in like 2021. Are they still valid?
I think in your case, Sam, we'll be valid.
I've still not been down. I keep going, I need to go and spend those vouchers.
I mean, what we did was normally these vouchers got a shelf life of a year, but because of the pandemic, we kind of extended it all for everybody.
I will do. I will come down this spring. I'm gonna come down and have a look.
Yeah, please do. I mean, and spring actually, when things warm up a bit, it's a nice time of year to come down.
Can we talk about LinkedIn?
Yeah.
Can we talk about LinkedIn? Are we going to talk about LinkedIn?
Yeah.
So we were chatting before we came on to record and like looking at what to ask you, and one thing that came up, like Igor mentioned about how, we were talking between us about how we need to integrate LinkedIn into our business a bit more and what we're trying to do here with the podcast. And I think you'd said that Max has got a very good presence on LinkedIn, and it's a world that we're not really kind of too familiar with. I just wondered if you could kind of give us a bit of an insight into how that plays a role in what you do as a
it's really interesting question, Sam, because I guess of all the sort of channels that we've got to communicate with the wider world,
for which there are many, aren't there?
For which there are many, and let's just say social media. I think LinkedIn's the one that I still feel least comfortable about the balance between the real kind of business content, which I think is how it started, and a little bit more kind of personality that seems to be creeping in these days, the way people are using it. And I think you get people that kind of support those two different bookends in the use of LinkedIn. But it still seems to me like it's that the dust has not yet settled on exactly how you should approach LinkedIn. I think what we tend to do is celebrate on LinkedIn some of the let's say achievements of the team or collaborations with various organisations, mainly regionally, that we're working with. But it's a very different look and feel to our Instagram account, to our Facebook account, to our Twitter account. I'm not sure I've got all the right answers.
No, it was an open question, really. I think me and Igor both kind of feel like it's a bit of an untapped unknown kind of platform. But I think from our point of view, it feels like an obvious direction to move in, because it's, what we're trying to do here is very business creative focus. And
yeah, absolutely.
It's a word that we don't tend to use much, because our businesses are both very visual. It's always been about Instagram and that kind of growth. But actually, I can kind of starting to slowly see the benefit of.
I think for us, we've tended to have more of that kind of business kind of override when we've thought about LinkedIn. But interestingly, back in the day, when we were starting up, I went to spend some time in North America, and there's a whole different story on that. But I wanted to get in touch with a guy called Chip Tate, who was a legend in craft distilling in the States at the time, setting up a distillery in Texas. So I contacted Chip through LinkedIn, just one of those, unsolicited inbound, please connect. And he hit yes, and I was thinking, well, why would he do that? Because I'm this guy that's worked in banking and finance roles. I couldn't be more different from his world. But he hit yes. So then I was able to send in some in-mail. And I basically said, Chip, I'm thinking about starting my own whiskey distillery in Derbyshire. Could I come and see you? I'd love to just kind of, try and drain a bit of your knowledge over a period of time. And actually, there's a whole other story, but Chip said yes. I went and spent a week with him in Texas.
Amazing.
And it was fundamental to when I got home. That's when we made the decision that we were going to do this. But it all started using LinkedIn.
That's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just reaching out to that guy and just saying.
And just to give a bit of perspective as well, Chip Tate, he's huge in that aspect, really, with Tate & Co. and everything else that he does. So
I mean,
for him to be able to give his time of day to you, it's quite incredible.
Yeah, I mean, he's a very generous guy. He's also he's a maverick. But the reason was in sort of 2015, when I was kind of starting to just do more and more research into the world of craft whiskey and craft distilling. One decision I made very explicitly early on was I wasn't going to go to established, let's say, UK producers of whiskey, which essentially is Scotland, to get all of my advice and input, because there was a real danger then that we'd end up building a Scottish distillery in England,
similar to
I just thought that'd be a huge mistake, because the Scots are very good at making Scotch whiskey, but B, an opportunity lost. So when I was doing research, I started to look to North America that had this really high growth craft distilling market. And whenever you were looking into craft whiskey in the States, Chip's name just kept pinging up all the time. So that's why I reached out to him. I just thought, well, look, let's start at the top and see if we.
I think it just goes to show, doesn't it? Like, sometimes you've just got to ask and reach out. And as long as you're coming from a genuine, humble place, that if someone's going to help you, they're going to want to help you.
Yeah, I mean, literally, I kind of. Chip said, yeah, come over. So I said, well, I'm gonna come in January 2016. Yeah, that's fine. So then I called him back. I booked my flights, Chip. I'm really coming. Yeah, fine. We've got you down, Max, for that week. And then like the week before, I got back in touch with him and I said, Chip, I am really coming. Next week I'm really coming. He said, yeah. He said, it's fine, Max. He said, and actually, I've spoken to my wife, and come and stay with us. So he originally gave me the recommendation for a hotel not far from the distillery. So I actually spent 5 days and 5 nights with Chip, literally, except when we were sleeping, day in, day out. And in terms of just keeping it honest, he was in the throes of setting up his second distillery. One of the things about Chip, he doesn't trust many other people, so he has to do everything himself, which could be, can be a bit of a shortcoming. But he was welding his own copper stills. So most of the time I was there in the day, I was holding welding rods for him. And then we were having a discussion, in between that oxyacetylene burner kind of noise. So,
wow.
But it's a fabulous, Chip was so generous, and it just gave me a sense in which, you can really do this, Max.
Yeah.
And, here's some things I've learned that you might want to sort of think about.
Wow. Incredible story.
It's just great to hear, isn't it? It is, I think.
So what's the future looking like for White Peak in general now? Now that you last year you threw out your first small batch, and what's the future looking like?
Yeah, I mean, last year was a really good year for us. We mentioned it before, to some extent a hard act to follow, but generally I think that kind of long-termism we were talking about, I think hopefully we've done a lot of things in the right way to build the business and build the brand. I mean, we've certainly made some mistakes along the way, don't get me wrong, but I think we're really kind of well positioned for our sort of longer term aspirations, which include having more overseas export markets, include building our business here domestically. We've got trade partners now, or stockists, from Falmouth in Cornwall all the way up to Perthshire in Scotland, but there's still much more we can do. So I think that kind of those growth targets look achievable on the back of what we did. Time frame is always a difficult one to call. Where we're going to be in the next 3, 5, 10 years, that's more difficult. It might take 6, 7, 12, 15 years. We don't really know, but I think we'll carry on kind of focusing on what we think is important. But within that, we do want to start developing what I would call some core releases. So last year we did 8 limited edition releases, all really well received. But as we start to kind of mature a little bit as a company, I think what we need to be able to offer people is, let's say, a core bottling that you can always come and get from White Peat Distillery, whether it's middle of January or middle of November. And it also helps with some of our trade partners. Some of them are quite big businesses of themselves, and I think they need to be able to educate their own followers and consumers about our products. And that's quite difficult to do if everything they get from us is a new limited edition release that isn't the same as the last one. So kind of trying to build up that, at least a base of core products, and then overlay that with all the kind of interesting limited edition releases that continue to excite us, really. Yeah,
it all sounds very exciting. I know you touched on that point of like trying to follow on from what was a really successful and good year, but I don't see why that doesn't, you can't go on and have other successful years that are going to be bigger and better than that. We just don't know, do we?
No.
But you're doing all of the right things and putting the right measures in place to.
I think so. I think
to grow the business.
Yeah, I think part of it is just don't expect it to happen. You've still got to make it happen.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't want your first year to not be successful. In our first year of selling whiskey, the fact it was successful is exactly what we wanted to happen.
Yeah.
So there's no sense in which that's kind of a negative for the future. Completely the opposite. But you start to feel a little bit of I guess the sense in which there's an expectation here for the business going forward.
It's going to be different, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's going to be different. Have you got any other questions you want to ask?
No.
Shall I ask the last question?
Yes.
So
I was going to.
I don't know if you've listened to what we've done before, but we always like to sort of wrap up the episode by asking our guests if they could rewind the clock and if they could go back to the 14, 15-year-old version of themselves, what would be the overarching piece of advice you'd give to a 15-year-old Max?
Yeah, I think probably the advice I would give would be to just think about life in maybe a different way from, let's say, the academic and educational focus, which is necessarily a big part of what you're experiencing at that time in your life. But perhaps what is it I think I might want to do when I'm in my mid-20s, which seems like an age away at that point. And lots of people won't know, and I'm not sure I did, but I don't think I really started to think about what I wanted to do until I'd come out the back of what I'd probably unfairly describe as a bit of a cookie cutter. At the time it was O-levels, not GCSEs, and I'm just showing my age now, but that kind of lent itself on to doing A-levels, which lent itself on to going to university. And I don't think I necessarily paused for breath to say, these are quite important life decisions here. Are they right for me? And so we certainly try and encourage that with our children, from the sense of, we've now had some of this experience. And we like to have those conversations with them. And, and also a sense in, if you are interested in something, grasp out for it, give it a go. There's actually no better time in many ways to try things when you're younger and, you've got less kind of packaging that you're carrying. And so it gives you, a little bit more kind of flexibility about trying things. I think just to have a bit of a longer term, pause for reflection if you can. I know that's not a typical thing for teenagers to do. But
I was just going to say, how's that conversation going with teenagers?
I think
your dad knows a thing or two.
Yeah.
You might want to listen to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just it's having the conversation, isn't it? And whatever's the right moment to do that. Might be walking the dog as opposed to.
It.
When you get back
right,
home
let's
from school.
sit down.
That's it.
It's got to be normal. It's got to be repetition, really.
But because I think there's different walks in life, and sometimes, I mean, it's a poem. We won't even go there, but there's a phrase, the road less travelled is actually often an interesting road, and it doesn't mean that you have to stick on it for life, but try it. You might like it.
Yeah, it's really good.
Great way to wrap it up.
Yeah, Max, you've been absolutely incredible. My brain is kind of like buzzing a little bit, just to kind of like
just hearing it's. I found it really reassuring.
Yeah,
to hear you talk openly about playing the long game and not going for that instant fix, and being able to kind of say no to what might be a short term bit of income. It's really, really positive to hear.
Yeah.
So thank you very much thanks for your time. Thanks for sharing your story. Thank you for trying to convince Igor to move to Derbyshire. We're getting there.
Well, thank you guys as well. I appreciate the invite to talk on your podcast, and hopefully connect with some of your followers. And it's been a really great chat.
We're going to share this one out on LinkedIn, aren't we? A bit more.
Yeah, and look, I never tire of talking about my business. I'm sure you're the same with yours. So, it's been a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
Great stuff.
Thanks, guys.
Survive.
Yeah.